Hey, what is going on, guys? Project Era Season 8 Beta has just come out, and I was able to get a few games in and try it out. So in today's video, I want to have a conversation about what my first impressions were of the test, and also look forward to what can we expect for the full launch. Now, we'll start out by talking about the general info and what the test was like, so you get an idea of how I was like playing it. We'll then move into how similar it was to the old era that you remember from earlier this year. We'll then move into how is the game polished? Are there a lot of bugs floating around? Next, we'll move into the queues and player counts. How long is it taking to get in the game? How many people are in a game? We'll then move into a reminder on the overall meta and talk about if there's any changes relative to the meta from earlier this year. And then finally, we'll talk about the expectations I have for launch. Okay, let's start out with the general info on the test. Now, unlike EZFN Season 4, where it was an open test where anybody could take part, this was a closed test, meaning there were maybe a few hundred people max playing in total. So that really narrowed down your player base. And it also meant that generally these players were of a higher average skill than your average era player that you remember from earlier this year. But that meant it was pretty difficult to perform. Well, you still totally could, but definitely the player skill was much higher, and it was also only on an EU solo test. You could not play duo, squads, or NA, so if you were from NA, good luck. It was going to be difficult to do well at 100 plus ping, but it's all right. You know, it's an opening test. It's not that many people. It makes sense why they did only EU solo. One more thing to note is that the server page that you may remember from 2023 of Era does not exist. I didn't expect it to exist because it hasn't existed for a long time, since like February of this year. But I'm still going to say it. I think the server page is one of the best features Era had, as it told you exactly how many players are in the game, so you didn't waste your time if there were 2 players, but you'd also be excited to get on if there were 50 players, right? And it lets you also switch between modes and just pick the first available, which means you could get in the queue faster. Yes, it's less important with instant queues, but I still think it's a really great feature, and I wish it was back, but sadly it's not. Moving to how similar it was to the old Era that you probably remember, overall, it feels very similar. If you poke around the launcher, yeah, there's a change here and there, but it's very similar to how you remember in terms of the design and the overall functionality that it provides. When you get into the game, it's very similar. One thing that is different, though, and I know a lot of you are disappointed about this, but all the items that you unlocked, as well as your career records, I believe, also have been reset. From what I hear, there's not really a way that's going to come back. So that's just the reality of the situation. It is unfortunate, but you should be able to earn at least some of that stuff back as you play when it comes to full release. Couple other notes is that challenges, of course, always have issues. If we look back to 2023, 24, you know, challenges have never worked 100% correctly. There's still issues, but that's probably being worked on. Edit on release does not exist. That can be very weird if you're coming from like EZFN where you're used to edit on release. But I honestly don't think that's necessarily bad, but just something to keep in mind. And then finally, Siphon is also in existence, which is great. Siphon just massively speeds up the game, reduces the amount of time you have to loot and farm mats. Really happy about that, but that's exactly the same as it was in the era that you remember from earlier this year. Okay, let's move on to how is the overall game polish in terms of bugs. Now, look, if you've played particularly EZFN Season 7, which don't get me wrong, I really enjoy EZFN Season 7, you can just tell the polish isn't quite there. You know, when you're running around and you pick up gliders, sometimes those gliders last indefinitely. Sometimes when you have gliders, you absorb other gliders or other items into your inventory and they disappear, never to be seen again. You know, you have issues where you start losing slots. It's more prevalent in high ping, but even at 0 ping, you can still have this bug. You can get to the point where you have no slots. You know, it just gets to a point where it's like, these issues are very annoying. And Era Season 8 really did not have these game-breaking issues from my experience during gameplay. I'm not losing slots. Things aren't getting absorbed into my inventory. It was overall a really good experience. Not to say it was completely bug-free. You know, one of the chests that I ran into in the corner tower or fish tower and tilted towers, the lower one would not open. That could have been just a one-game thing. You know, there's bugs here and there, but overall it was a very enjoyable experience, and I have to say the polish is really solid. Just like how you probably remember it from Season 8 earlier this year, it's really polished and really nice to play. Okay, let's move on to the queue/player counts. So this is always a debate over how fast should the queue be to get into a game faster versus having more players per game. Era is definitely very focused on the quick queues. You know, when they say they have instant queues, they mean it. The longest I wait was maybe 2 to 3 minutes at most, but realistically, when you're waiting, it's really 30 seconds to 1 minute. And honestly, that's really nice because it just means you're able to get in quickly. Now, I would say that that may not always work in full release, as the player count could be a little bit low when I was playing, 15 to 20. But do keep in mind this is a closed test, and there's a number of factors changing how many players are going to be in the game, right? It's closed test, so much smaller pool, but only one server and one mode. So that's going to increase the number of players per game. So it definitely requires some tuning, but it is fun, though, to not have to wait long and be getting into a game. So if you don't have spawn, no worries, you'll be in another game in just a few minutes at most. Let's move on to the overall meta, just as a general reminder, and talk about if there's any real changes against Season 8 from before. Honestly, the meta, I didn't really notice any balance changes, vaults, buffs, nerfs. There's just nothing there, which is fine, because I think the Season 8 meta is overall pretty good. I don't think it's perfect. The biggest problem I have is with the shotguns, because it's really just the shotgun. You run the pump shotgun and the pump shotgun only. Maybe you could argue the blue tack is better than the green pump, but beyond that, the argument just really isn't there, and it's just a little bit frustrating that it's a one-shotgun meta. You have to run the pump, which is a little frustrating, but the other weapon classes, I think, are very free and open. The ARs, there's 5 competitive options: standard, silenced, heavy, infantry, and scoped, depending on whether you're in controller, keyboard, prefer close range or long range. You can find an option that works well for you, which is really enjoyable. There's multiple shotgun backups, flintlock, compact SMG, silenced SMG, even dualies and hand cannon aren't too bad. Lots of options there, your sniper meta, you've got silenced sniper, hunting rifle, heavy sniper, and boombow, which is very enjoyable. 4 viable options. Yes, boombow's a little annoying, but it's not completely busted. The explosives and / structural destroyer, you have the minigun, RPG, grenade launcher. As you can see, there's just a lot of options in every class except shotguns, which is genuinely enjoyable. Now, moving to the mobility meta, I'd overall say the mobility is at a medium level. It's not like, very early on in like Season 1 where you just had to walk everywhere and it's painfully slow. But it's not Season 7 or Season 9 where you're just flying across the map. It's really, I think, a good middle level. Some of you may argue it's not enough. Some may argue it's too much. I think it's quite good. I personally prefer medium level mobility metas, but who's to say you're wrong if you were a high or low mobility? That's personal preference, but I do think it is overall a medium level. Overall, there are still a few issues, though. There's still a few garbo items like the scoped revolver and thermal AR that really should be buffed or vaulted, but there's not too many of them. I think overall it's a pretty solid meta. But again, no real changes from the old Season 8 that you remember from earlier this year. Now, let's move to expectations for launch. Unfortunately, I don't have a confirmed date for you, but there are some things we can infer, right? We know that they're probably going to want to test NA. I'd assume, this is not confirmed, but I assume they want to test NA, so that's going to push back the launch, and they haven't tested duos or squads either, or any LTMs they might want to test. So keep in mind, they probably are going to run those tests before launching fully. Again, I don't know that for sure. That's just a general assumption I'm going to make. So it's probably not coming out tomorrow, but you just don't know exactly when these things come out. Sometimes there's delays, it can be frustrating, but there could be a last minute issue. We'll just have to wait and see with that. So just to wrap up my thoughts here, overall, I'd say Season 8 of Project Era Beta really was pretty impressive. It wasn't perfect, but I do think it's overall pretty good. Before this video, I would say I was cautiously optimistic. I'd probably still say I'm cautiously optimistic, but a little bit more on that optimistic front and less on the cautious, because I think generally this is looking pretty good. We'll just have to wait and see how things develop. Of course, there are advantages to other projects like EZFN, but it's really going to be interesting to have another project option. I think is overall really solid. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will catch you in the next one.